Hello, and welcome to the webinar on what happened in Connecticut's 2023 legislative session. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Erika Haynes, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the School and State Finance Project. And I'm going to walk you through what happened and where we are headed next from the 2023 legislative session in Connecticut. So today we're going to talk about the state K-12 education funding changes coming out of the 2023 legislative session, a little about us at the School and State Finance Project. We're a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan policy organization founded in 2015, and we work to develop data-driven solutions to ensure all public school students receive equitable education funding that supports their learning needs. And we really strive to be a trusted resource that works collaboratively with policymakers, school district officials, community leaders, and all individuals. So the goal today, or the goals, are to review the context of how new funding policies were developed, and how new funding policies are going to impact towns, districts, and choice programs, and to identify the next steps to build upon these successes and clarify future uncertainty. So we're going to start with the context of which the policy was developed. And House Bill 5003 was truly an ambitious effort to reimagine state education funding. And the goals were twofold, really. One was to accelerate full funding of the education cost sharing formula to fiscal year 25. That's the 24-25 school year. And it had previously been fiscal 28, the 27-28 school year. So we really wanted to ensure that districts were seeing full funding sooner. And when we look at education cost sharing, it's the only one of the 10 funding formulas currently in Connecticut that takes student learning needs into consideration. So the goal of 5003 was also to extend the education cost sharing formula to all public school students, so that whether they are in a magnet, a charter, an agri-science program, or participating in the open choice program, their learning needs were taken into consideration when funding students. And by achieving this, what would happen is that the education cost sharing formula would be used to determine state education funding for all of Connecticut's more than 500,000 public school students. And that truly every student would be funded fully according to their learning need. And it would eliminate then the block grant system that we use for other funding formulas. And at the same time, it would eliminate the local general education tuition, which sending districts pay to choice programs when a child opts into, say, an agri-science program. There's a tuition piece there with some of these choice programs, and the goal was to eliminate that as well. I want to anchor in the fact that we got an amazing thing done last year. And the reason we got it done is because so many of you participated in so many different ways. So when we say with your teamwork and collaboration, so many of you worked to build your own knowledge on what was happening with education funding, reached out to people in your communities to talk about this more, and contacted decision makers both at the local level and at the state level to say education funding was important to you and that this initiative really mattered. So this didn't happen without you. You all made this happen. So together, we achieved this historic $150 million investment in education funding for Connecticut students. And that's huge. So huge. It's the largest year-over-year investment in the past decade and the second largest in state history. Huge. And what it really means, truly, is an increase of $324 million more over the next biennium, that 2-year budget cycle, for K-12 students in Connecticut. What this really did is change the trajectory of education cost sharing grant, the dollars that go to traditional public school districts and regional public school districts to get more funding sooner to districts. And underlying all that, what it really means is that we provided fiscal stability to districts by alleviating part of their choice tuition burden in future years. Districts are going to save at least $34 million a year due to this new tuition cap. And we increased state support for choice programs, such as the magnet schools and charter schools, agri-science, and the open choice program. So we're going to talk a little bit about the education cost sharing grant. This specifically impacts each one of us because it supports all of Connecticut's traditional public school districts, the one for your town, as well as regional public school districts. And the phase-in had been a 10-year phase-in that was set to be fully funded in the 27-28 school year. And this shortened that phase-in with an additional $68.5 million more invested in the 24-25 school year in the education finance reform line item that appeared in the budget this year. And the only component of the education cost sharing formula that was changed was the phase-in formula. So you may recall that because education cost sharing takes into consideration the learning needs of students, if students come from an environment of economic disadvantage, or they are students who are learning English, there are additional weights to ensure that districts are adequately funded to support those learning needs of those students. None of that changed. The only thing that changed was getting the funding to districts sooner. And you see that here. So when we look at the top row is just the fiscal years, and the second row is what that previous phase-in schedule was. And you can see at the bottom row that 2-year shave off. So now in the 24-25 school year, districts are attaining their funding. And at the same time, through complex history of school funding, we have school districts that when their grant is calculated, they're receiving more funding than the grant says that they should be getting, the formula says that they should be getting in that grant. And what has happened over the previous 2 legislative sessions is that those losses have been extended out over time. So rather than having districts lose all of their funding, or the funding that they're supposed to lose in the 27-28 school year, that timeline has been significantly extended out, which again creates more fiscal stability for districts. So I want to talk about some of the choice program changes. And before I do, I want to just encourage you all, if you have questions, please reach out. These choice program changes are a little more technical, and while I'll highlight some of them in the uncertainty, if you have questions, I really encourage you to just reach out and ask. We're going to start with the magnets and the agri-science formulas. So we have regional education service centers in Connecticut that run magnet schools. So you might know some of the names of these operators as EdAdvance, ACES, CREC, or Learn. And those are just some examples. They run magnet schools, and we have school districts that run magnet schools that are inter-district. So really, when we're talking about magnet schools, we're just differentiating here between who runs the magnet school, and additionally agri-science. And these formulas for these types of schools are not changed this school year. The changes are a little unclear in the 24-25 school year. So looking at the changes for next school year, operators are going to receive at least the per student grant that they are receiving this year for each student. But tuition that they charge the sending district for students who are coming into these types of choice programs is capped or limited at 58% of the amount charged per student in this school year. And that funding exists in that education finance reform line item. But the uncertainty here is that it isn't really clear how the per student grants will increase next school year to invest the additional money. So we know we have additional monies allocated, but the how of the per student allocation remains unclear. There are some specific pieces for communities called out here, and I'll just share those. And if you have questions and these affect you and you have concerns, please reach out. But there are some differences for East Hartford, Manchester, Windsor, New Britain, New London, Bloomfield, and some specifics for Hartford for this school year. So I want to just articulate those, but not get bogged down on those. Again, please spend time on the slide and reach out if you have questions. So we covered magnet schools. For charter schools, what has been happening for charter schools is that the movement of the legislature has been to bring the charter school formula into alignment with the education cost sharing formula. As we said, the intention was for all of these different school types to ensure student learning need is taken into consideration. And that has been happening, and that phase-in will continue. However, beyond the 24-25 school year, there isn't a phase-in articulated. So charter schools don't get to alignment with education cost sharing formula, and they get to kind of partial alignment. So student learning needs are being taken into consideration, but the phase-in for that full funding is not extended in legislative language. The budget did contain funding for new charter schools in New Haven and Norwalk. We do have non-tuition Board of Ed magnet schools and the open choice program. And it is broadly unchanged this year. Operators are not permitted to charge tuition, and existing per student formulas for state grants are in place. For 24-25 school year and each year thereafter, operators will receive at least the per student grant that they received in this school year. And again, those financial commitments are supported by state funding in the education finance reform line item. And yet the per student grants have not been articulated and how that will look to invest the additional money. So I talk about these allocations existing in the education reform, finance reform line item, and yet a lack of clarity. And you see that here. So charter schools, there was an allocation of $9.4 million more for phase-in. Board of Ed magnet schools, 13.3 million more. The open choice program, 11.4 million more. Regional Education Service Center magnet schools at 40.2 million more, and agri-science programs at 7.2 million more. And yet that's just a large number. So right now, if you called and asked me what this would look like for the agri-science program in your community and how that money would be allocated to that agri-science program, it's really unclear right now. I want to talk about a few other funding changes, and then we'll do a little look ahead. So the special education excess cost grant is not fully funded, but did receive a significant funding increase. And again, I know how important this is to all of you. If you recall, excess cost grant is allocated when a district spends more on an individual student than their per student spending average at 4.5 times. So if the cost to educate a child who has special education needs is more than 4.5 times the average per pupil expense in the district, districts can submit for reimbursement to the state above that 4.5 times. And that investment in order to support those reimbursements grew by 25 million into a total pool of 181 million. And it's important to know that previously the allocation had changed so that there are tiers of reimbursements, and districts with the lowest wealth receive reimbursement at 91%. Districts in the middle tier receive reimbursement at 88%. And districts in the wealthiest tier receive a reimbursement at 85%. And yet this is always still unclear because actual reimbursement levels depend on the total number of claims made statewide. What do all of our special education students need, and what was the financial impact on districts, and how does that intersect with that 181 million that is set aside to help reimburse? So there's some great news there, and yet still some difficult unpredictability and constraints. There were some additional changes to school meals, but for this school year in particular, there's an additional 16 million to extend free school meals to all students from families making at or below the 200% federal poverty level. And some other state grants were kept through 2025, meaning they aren't growing. Health services for private school students, regional education service center operations, and bilingual education did not grow. There was just a minor technical change with priority school districts that really supports priority school districts who are exiting out of the priority school district program, and just making sure that that transition out of the program is smooth. School construction reimbursement. A lot of you have talked to me about this. And while the prior law was a reimbursement range of 10 to 70%, it's now 10 to 80%. And federal funds are now allowed to be considered part of the municipal share of project costs, which really, I think, better meets the needs of municipalities supporting new school projects. So we've got through all this, but what are the unknowns? The adopted budget really contains that unknown of what does the per student grant amount look like, and so that we can get to the specifics of how this affects the schools and choice programs in your community. It might be a school that your child goes to, or a friend or relative's child goes to. It might just be a magnet school in your community you'd like to know. And right now, at that per student level, rather than that just really broad space, we don't know. And so that's a significant unknown, something we think is incredibly important to look at. And it isn't clear whether choice operators that charge tuition will receive more total funding per student in fiscal year 2025. And a couple of the pieces that aren't clear, this it could end up in a result of choice operators receiving less per student from all sources. And I think we all don't want that to happen. So, the tuition cap means there's less local revenue. Your school district is not going to be paying as much to a choice school operator. But we don't have the clarity on the state per student grant. And so yet we don't know if that per student grant will make up for that tuition loss. And so that's a significant unknown. Looking ahead, we really need some language for clarity. The goals of House Bill 5003 were to help bridge that fiscal cliff of districts losing their ESSER dollars, the federal COVID relief dollars, ensuring that we can respond to the crisis of growing student need and reducing economic and racial funding disparities, truly to invest in Connecticut's future. So our work in this upcoming legislative session is to, again, hopefully work with all of you to ensure that the $150 million investment really provides students, regardless of where they live or the type of public school they attend, the resources they need to succeed both inside and outside the classroom. I want you all to reach out to me with any questions you have. Here is my contact information. Please reach out. Let me know where you need clarity. And if you are really fired up about something, let me know, and let me know how we can collaboratively work together. So I want to stop this share. I tell you all, I hope you're having a wonderful back to school, and we will connect. Thank you so much for your time and energy, and have a great day.